Okay, so hello everyone. My name, as you heard, is Smitha Prasadam. I am Indian by birth, but most of my life I've lived in the UK. When we moved from India, which is as multi-faith in one way that you can get, but actually there tend to be pockets of those faiths, we moved to the UK, which was a very much a Christian context. And the very many places that I lived in initially were just almost nearly 100% Christian or Christian heritage. Later, living in London, Luton, Birmingham, these became places which were multi-ethnic hubs, which were multi-faith, multi-ethnic, and in fact referred to as super diverse cities. So lots of learning. I'm now chaplain, as you heard, at St. Albans, which is the Anglican church here in Denmark, but it's a very ecumenical venture because we have many other Christians from different backgrounds with us and from many countries, so 30 different countries nearly. The other title that Christina referred to is that I am the bishop's BAME advisor, the bishop's Black, Asian, and minority ethnic concerns advisor in the diocese. So that's a bit of a supportive role, an advocacy role, kind of putting the experiences, minority experiences, in majority view, so that there's better understanding from those perspectives. But today, I'm really delighted to be able to talk about some of my experiences here in Denmark, informed by experience in the UK in terms of interfaith work. And that interfaith work is a joy, a privilege, but also a huge challenge, because we all come with biases of different kinds, you know, of what different faiths are about. And some of that is the stuff of myth, because it comes from either popular culture or certain types of journalism, dare I say, sometimes wokeism, all sorts of isms that we bring to it. My experience of coming to Denmark was to see that I was in a completely different context, that the kind of very large, diverse, multi-ethnic scene that I was used to is much more kind of homogeneous scene here in Denmark on the surface. Because actually, in truth, whether it's at the universities or in many of the companies, you know, professional organizations, there is huge diversity here. And with that diversity comes the diversity of faith. Now, from the UK looking in, many people think of Denmark and they've heard one word other than pastry. They've heard hygge, or as they would say in England, huggy, yeah? And this huggy, this hygge, is this very cozy, lovely feeling that is, I think it's branded and marketed quite a bit, actually, is what I've discovered. But having come to Denmark, there's some other words that I've come to like very much more. You have this wonderful concept of fællesskaber, and that gives a kind of consciousness and a beauty to living. One of the other words that I came across very early on is actually hellige. And now if I'm pronouncing these wrong, please forgive me. Okay, but I think you know what I mean. But this kind of spaciousness, this beauty of having room to reflect and a kind of generosity, and I've really appreciated that as an incomer. But alongside that, I've noticed some other things which are also incredible, things which unite people, knit people together with a wonderful Danishness, if I can put it that way. So from very early on in schools to have morn song and a Danish songbook and things that unite people together in this lovely, lovely way. It's absolutely incredible. I know no other country, and you can correct me later, which prides its national flag so much as Denmark. And the fact that celebrations, birthdays, you can't have it without the Danish flag. And it's absolutely wonderful for identity and that kind of togetherness that's there. I also find many wonderful things in terms of community and community provision, which comes from the state. So the commune has so much care for the people within that geographical boundary. So everything that I am saying is about the newcomer's perspective on Danish society. And later when we have the Q&A, please do challenge any of this if I've got it wrong. Now, all of this loveliness has a flip side to it, in my view. And that flip side is that it can be difficult for people who don't understand that, for example, the flag, the pride in the flag is such a lovely thing, because in one sense, it feels quite nationalistic. And in the UK, you see the national flag usually at football matches or at demonstrations, not at birthday celebrations. There's also another thing that this very Danishness can prove to be the barrier for people who don't quite get it, who don't know. And I think lots of people have spoken to me about the rules of engagement and the unwritten rules. And it's the unwritten rules when it comes to faith as much as living that need to be traversed in order to create, I guess, a more understanding space, the place where people can connect with each other better. So from Denmark, I think maybe it feels that the UK might look like utopia in terms of interfaith work. But the truth is that in the UK, in many neighborhoods across England, different faiths and ethnic communities live and work next to each other, but rarely interact with one another, same as Denmark. So I see within that there are three problems. That one is that there might be a lack of understanding, a lack of trust or respect for one another, and that's not good for healthy community. Often in areas, there's quite significant deprivation, and people seem to battle it on their own rather than deal with it as community. They don't come together or talk or act together. And the third thing that I think is that there's a lot of anxiety about difference or change, because the areas begin to look different, or people are different, they're talking different languages, or there's different food in shops, the social norms aren't known. And the Church of England, in England, undertook a major project, which was Faith in the City. Faith in the City had a lot of offshoots. And one of the charitable wings of the church was the Church Urban Fund, which began to say that what mattered were local people in local communities who are best placed to identify and develop the mechanisms for being good neighbors across religious, social, political, ethnic divides. And so that reluctance or the difficulty about encountering the stranger, that we tried to bridge those things at two levels. And I think the two levels are essentially about social interaction, about how to meet, how to actually step into each other's spaces and make them communal spaces rather than ghettos. So one is social interaction, and the second is about social action. And it's through these two mechanisms that I think those differences are bridged. So thinking about social interaction, I think it's about creating opportunities for people to meet, to have conversations, and the only agenda is to get people together. Because the truth is that when you get people together, that's when things begin to happen, because they see each other. They see each other as people rather than the kind of us and them, whether it's on a faith perspective or linguistic perspective or whatever perspective. So let me give some examples, I think, about things for social interaction all year round. Now, in Birmingham, which is where I ministered last, we had a thing which we started in Birmingham, which was called Places of Welcome. In fact, Place of Welcome. And what it was essentially was a network of hospitality, spaces in neighborhoods where people could feel that they could connect, where they could belong, where they could contribute. And it was run by local community groups of different faiths, whether Muslim, Christian, Hindu, Sikh, any of them. In our church, we created a place of welcome on a Wednesday morning. Why? Because we had a service at that time. And we thought, oh, what's the way to do it? It's to leave the doors wide open and say, this is a place of welcome. Come in. People could come in for the service or for the post-service cup of tea and cake. Here it would have to be ke or kafa. And then the conversation if and when they needed it. Now, from one place of welcome, which started in an area where there were, different religions, different faiths, different languages, there are now 450 across the UK. But each place of welcome is really different. It's catered to that community, that context, that particular community's gifts and skills and knowledge and what there was. Each place, each venue is different. Ours was a church. Some meet in church halls or gardens, community centres, mosques, temples, sports halls, scout huts. All of these happen. The second example I want to give is about a project which has an umbrella term, which is called Near Neighbours. And Near Neighbours is a way of bringing people together with a little seed fund, so people can apply for a fund. And really, it was to bring people together to do something nice for their communities. So the very first thing that we did, we applied for some funding, and I'm not talking about much at all. It was like £100, €100, to literally buy seeds to plant all around the community, or to buy little bedding plants to make hanging baskets to put all around our streets. Just something that people could enjoy, could see, and could say, oh, I did that, or I did that with someone who was different from me. We did it together. We mightn't speak the same language, or we mightn't see eye to eye, but we came together for something. I can give some other examples, like the big picnic. We organized the big picnic on a bank holiday. It was the day when, we knew that on a Monday, Usually in the UK, bank holidays are on Mondays. And we knew that everybody would be free in their communities, available, looking for something to do. So we created a big picnic, took loads of blankets for people to sit on, rugs for people to sit on, play equipment, footballs, cricket bats, lots of food, lots of music, different activities for different ages, musical instruments so that people could try out bagpipes, doll drums, or steel pans. Just put them all out so that people could try them. And there was no cost to it, no expectation of it, but just to bring people together so that little conversations could happen, or people could just say, hey, I think you live on my street, or I'm sure I've seen you at the bus stop. I've seen you somewhere. And that would be the start of conversations. There were things which were very intentional, focused on major events where people of other faiths particularly didn't have a say. Now, if you think of the UK, November the 11th is a big day. It's Remembrance Day. And we remember those who'd given their lives in world wars. And just thinking of war, it seemed always as if the story was told from a European perspective, as if there had never been a cost to life or limb or to economy in any other part of the world. So we started gathering stories. And in 2014, which was the 100th anniversary of the start of the First World War, we did something which was called We Will Be One. WW1, World War I, was turned on its head into something which said, we will be one. That was the acronym. And it was to collect stories of local heroes, and those heroes who came from Muslim backgrounds, Sikh backgrounds, Hindu backgrounds, so that it was to recognize that it was a common effort to seek peace. And that telling those stories of 100 years ago created stories of now and working for peace in our own communities. So I want to talk maybe about the second aspect that I mentioned, not just social interaction, but social action. Because by bringing people together for just those conversations or opportunities to have coffee and cake or see something different, people then began to want to do something together to address issues, concerns, challenges, and problems which were in our local community. And it was to offer safe space for people to meet, to talk, to maybe eat together, and then ask to reflect on things. But these were ideas which came quite organically. And if I give you a list of concerns that we dealt with, it was things like litter in the community, rubbish that seemed to be mounting up, and what we were going to do. Well, actually what happened was a series of litter picking Saturdays in order to encourage everyone in the community to take care of the community. Now that kind of example, certainly in the place I live in Denmark, I don't see it. I don't see litter because people seem to be so much more conscious. But maybe there are other places, other things which could be a concern to a community. Unemployment, crime, car parking. Now you might think that's really weird because, here everything seems to be so well organized. But there were areas in our community where people seemed to think, oh, petty thieving or mugging or vandalism to cars was some kind of fun. But the minute people got together, and especially people who looked different, somebody who wore a skull cap or a turban or a cross, all chatting together in the car park gave a very different impression to those people who might wish it harm. The thing about bringing people together, whether for talking together for social interaction or social action, is a better understanding, really, not only about the individual, but about the community they live in, and the adopted country, for example. One of the things that I've discovered from my language class is people didn't have any idea what the communa was, because it wasn't seen as the district. It was seen as, because in everyone's minds, it was the hippie commune. So it was the place where the hippies met. So it's just basically breaking things down into little bits and saying, we might come, I mentioned biases before, but we might come with understandings, certainly of certain words. They might have certain connotations, but it's sort of dismantling some of those things, working together. One of the biggest things in terms of social action that we did was to bring civic leaders, faith leaders, religious leaders, and the police together to come as community to address the needs of community. And when I talk of these, and maybe we can go into Q&A in a minute, I keep stressing that all of this, the bridging of faiths, is actually to see in each other brother and sister living and occupying same spaces, being present to one another, working together, having a focal point, creating hubs for meeting, developing as we go, looking for new partnerships. One of the best examples that I want to talk about is quite often people tell us what we ought to be thinking about, or, there's a drip down from on high, trickle down about what we ought to know or information that we ought to have. But through these meetings in our local communities, there was one thing that we discovered. For example, male health. So all the men on the screen think of plumbing, okay? Just thinking about talking about male health issues was a taboo in our community. But for men to come together and say, oh, this is an issue, I don't want to talk about it, but to have a men-only space, inviting doctors to come in and to talk to faith communities about male health issues was a phenomenal breakthrough. And not really the particular, church or community wasn't the space you normally associated it with a health center. Equally, things about nutrition, practical things. And then those were the occasions through which we went on to other ground, and the safer ground from common experience, which was about life together, to be able to enter new space where we talked about our approaches to food, dress, hair. All of this are reflections of our faith, actually. Why do you do this? Why do you do that? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? Started in a much safer conversational space rather than a confrontational space. So talking about conversation versus confrontation, I want to talk about, and maybe I'll finish here, recently, the Church of England has been working on something called living in love and faith. And that living in love and faith has been a project with, I think it was 57, 58 theologians coming together. And it's 400 and some pages of a report to encourage people to talk about human identity and sexuality and talking about those differences, but actually talking in space where people can converse well and disagree well. And the pastoral principles that were applied to those was to say that these were conversations or mechanisms to try and address ignorance, to acknowledge any prejudice that we might have, to admit hypocrisy in the way we see each other, to cast out fear, to speak into silence, and to pay attention to power dynamics within relationships. And we were talking specifically as the church about identity and sexuality. But I think in all our engagement, especially across faith boundaries, to observe those pastoral principles, to engage in those conversations which lead to better conversations and to better engagement is better than the kind of meeting at the point of confrontation. I've talked about lots of different things. Some are practical ideas from experience, some are about context. Maybe you have questions. I think, Christina, you want plenty of space for people to maybe ask about the specifics or different things. So should I stop there, do you think?
Yeah, you can also comment later. I think it will give a good dynamic to have maybe some questions now. So, but I would like to thank you for, I think actually you covered really a lot of stuff in a very concise way, and it is very inspiring. So thank you so much so far. And yeah, so then I'll invite you also to, you can, I don't know how many of you are very familiar with Zoom, but you can put up your hand like this, or you can put up your hand in the fancy way with the icon. So you're welcome to give a question. But I think I'll take the opportunity to ask one question myself first, and then I know Anna has also one. So maybe if we go first. And I presented this to you just when we checked the sound, Smitha, as well. We at the office at the Interchurch staff today, we had a presentation by Claudia something from Germany, who worked for 20 years with cross-cultural work in Germany, and actually she had been a little bit disillusioned by the ability of the formal churches to open up for migrants and for people with another backgrounds, and had found that the more viable initiatives were those that were actually started up like an association or something outside the church, and then maybe they could enter the church later. But it was quite difficult for the average parish to open up and actually integrate people with another background. And one of the issues was how that they were not really willing to actually share the power positions in terms of who are the pastors, who are on the council, and so on. So, and if that is not happening, then true integration will not happen. So, and that hit me a bit. So I thought maybe you would have a comment to that, and maybe some of you others here in the room could also comment on that. So that is my comment / question.
Well, absolutely, which is why I think I said right at the beginning, from Denmark, looking at matters of interfaith and collaborative work, you might look at the UK and think, oh, they do it so well, and they've got so many things, and they're way ahead of us. And I think it's true up to a point. I think there is still in the UK, in many places, a resistance actually. And I think resistance always comes whenever there's change. So everything we're happy with things as we are, thank you very much. And then you have rhetoric, which comes with, they've come to our country, so we do it like this here. Do you recognize that? And I think that's true here as well. You know, they need to learn that. Well, actually, both of us need to learn. We all need to learn from each other is the thing. But I think it's all this stuff about, okay, there's going to be resistance. Let's anticipate resistance and think how we can knock it back a little bit. And I think sometimes there are people in our communities who are really good. These are the ones who've traveled, or who my best friend is, or they know so much more about something. It's about inviting people in, but never being put off, I think, by the resistance that you encounter. Thinking that resistance, challenge is going to be a natural part of this kind of work. We didn't experience it, but I know that in some other contexts, that any collaborative work like this, of engaging together, did have people shouting, trying to break it up, all that kind of, but that stems from one of those pastoral principles. It's fear. It's fear of what's going to happen. Actually, the fear is that something absolutely even better might happen. Yeah, when you're happy as you are, you don't want anything better. You don't know anything better. So I think it's always trying to think, okay, how can I persuade somebody? And for us as Christians, the gospel has always got to be good news. So if the gospel is good news, let's gossip it, let's share it, and let's share it in word, and let's share it in deed, let's share it with others, let's share it with people of faith, with people of no faith, and let's come together, because actually our common point is our humanity. And if we have with that humanity all those other aspects of us, which we all try to be in the better part of whatever faith we express, then what joy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks. And then I'll pass the word to Anne, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Smitha. We are so lucky to be able to invite you to the webinar today. I have a couple of questions. One of them is your experiences in regard to mixed marriages. Because in super diverse and also in not so diverse countries, we have this experience about mixed marriages and have to think about both practically, but also theologically what to do about it. So I would like to ask if you have some comments on that.
Yes.
And then I would also ask you, it's not really in connection with that, but another question for me is, you started talking about your experiencing in India the minority position, and also in England the majority position in regarding to your faith. What about in regard to your gender, the female experience in this in connection with this minority and majority positions that you have experienced different? Yeah.
Fabulous questions, but how long have I got? Have I got all evening? Okay, so mixed marriages was the first one I think you asked. So I'm in a mixed marriage. My mixed marriage, and this was a really tricky thing that we had to negotiate, was that I married a Roman Catholic. Okay, now that should be fine, shouldn't it? We're both Christians after all, but actually it wasn't. And I want to start with that before we think, oh, what happens of any other faith and Christians marrying each other? Because actually the tensions are the same as I experienced from my Anglican heritage marrying somebody of Roman Catholic heritage. So the great divorce of 500 years ago was still the great divorce that we started with, okay? I think there are huge, I mean, the world that we live in now, we live in a global village. What's one of the impacts of that? Mixed marriages. It didn't happen before. I mean, even the royal household, which was always kind of marrying within, look at what happens. Royal families marry outside of now. While I can talk about some really good examples of mixed marriages, which happen because actually second, third, and fourth generations have come to understand that when you have children growing up in a new context, actually the whole relationship dynamic is different. And some of that learning comes because even in the other countries, so from my context, it's India, but visitors from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, coming into certain areas of the UK would find that what they were coming to in the UK was their own village from 30 years ago. Because what tends to happen in communities is when they don't feel safe, they tend to make a small enclave and try and keep it within. Everything has to be within. And so even breaking out of it in any way. So for teenagers learning to discover who they are, it's a tension. How much more then the tension of marriage? And if people then discover that actually in the society that they live in, which is far more liberal, where the rules of meeting each other, marrying each other are different, then again, it's a matter of understanding. So in terms of mixed marriages, in many cultures, it's about arranged marriages. The parents who have known so much more and cared for you and so on, arrange the marriage. And many people accept that that's the best gift that parents can give by bringing not two individuals together, it's two families together in marriage. Now, there's another aspect, which is the unhealthy aspect, which is a forced marriage. And a forced marriage is never good for anybody. And a forced marriage is where it's beyond an individual's will. And quite often it happens where it's one or other party is, underage and so on. And then that's a whole legal issue. But in terms of mixed marriages, I think it's all about learning to live with difference and for families to live with difference and learning how, again, to accept, to receive that difference as gift. I'd better stop there on that one. And then you asked about gender and about being minority. Well, I feel minority wherever I go, I have to say, me personally. So in India, I lived as part of a minority as a Christian, because in India, the context is largely Hindu, 77% Hindu, 11% Muslim. It means there are more Muslims in India than in the Middle East. There are more Christians in India than in the UK. Even though we're a tiny 1%, because when you have a population of more than 1 billion, it's definitely going to be more. So going to the UK, yes, I was minority, I was Indian, but in the church, as an Indian woman, I'm a minority within a minority. And certainly in church leadership, Denmark is way advanced compared to the UK. You've had women priests, women bishops for way longer than the Church of England. So how does it feel? Here, it feels really different because within those minorities in the UK context, I come to minister in the Church of, in the Anglican Church in Denmark, where the Anglican Church is a minority. So in terms of gender, it's very different. I see the very many women priests here, and it's a source of great joy, actually, because women priests, yeah, we've only celebrated the 30th anniversary just recently. Well, I think you've had women bishops for longer than that, haven't you?
Yeah, it's 10 years back, isn't it? I think, Anna, maybe you know that better than me.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, 15 years, maybe even 10, 15 years, like. Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
I'm not really sure, but we will Google it.
I think so.
Yeah. Should I? We had the Bishop Liselotte Rebel. She just retired last year, and she was a bishop for 26 years.
Yeah,
she was the first woman bishop in Helsingør.
Yeah.
So for 28 years now, was the first woman bishop in Denmark.
Amazing.
Thank you. Great. Yeah. Good. Okay. Jonas?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for some interesting points, especially the place of welcome. I think is quite interesting, and I think you said something quite important, that we have to be good at disagreeing or disagreeing well. But what is your experience in the intercultural work when you have, well, the Church of Denmark as one actor, but then you have a second and a third actor that are disagreeing unwell? How should we then act within that disagreement?
What can you give me that example of the other participants? Because I think some of it comes to the power balance that Christina spoke about before. So
one example is once a month we have a gathering for eating, and everybody is welcome. And we have some with a Christian background from the Middle East who are sometimes quite preaching towards people with an other Christian background, and especially towards Muslims. Yeah.
So I think one of the things is the behaviors around conversion. So there's no one stronger in faith than a convert, and they are more evangelistic than anybody else, because they've just received this immense gift. So then it's tell everybody about it, but not only tell everybody about it, it's going to bash them on the head with it. So that's when you get the disagreements, because what's happening is there's more telling than listening. And what I always say to people is, we have two of these and one of these, so let's use them in proportion. Yeah. And I think the disagreeing well comes there. Let the person speak, but be ready to listen twice as hard, as well as double the amount, in order to try and understand. Yeah. And I think it's what I said about resistance. Our human psyche is that we tend to have a herd mentality. So we'll go to, people near, most like us. And in going to people most like us, we create a halo effect around some people, and we create the horns effect around some other people. So some people, the way they talk or the way they do things will always be wonderful to us. And then the way other people talk will always be negative. You know, it'll be the whatever they say, even if they're saying the right thing, it's not to receive it well. So I think in any of those, particularly interfaith encounters, it's important to lay out the ground rules right at the beginning. So in the shared faith meal, you know, shared meal with 3 different groupings, I think you say, what we're doing is we're coming together, we're coming to eat together, we're coming to share stories together, we're coming to listen to each other. And when when we have disagreement, this is how we're going to deal with it. X is here as a listener in order to listen, and then you take it out of the big kind of fisticuffs, really, that might come, you know, verbal, loud and challenging thing. But then you might be able to come back, return to it, because I think that's really important to say. Well, we want to talk about this actually. Let's come back, because what you said about, now it could be something about as simple as washing, yeah? Or it could be something about something much more theological, if you want to. Let's come back to that. Let's explore it. And then the next time, invite 2 or 3 speakers to say something about their perspective. That's the disagreeing well, but listening better.
Thank you very much for these points. I think Anne has a few more questions, so
yes,
please, Anne.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You have stayed in Denmark for a couple of years now, right? So what I was curious about is, what are your best advice for Folkekirken? Do you have something that we should really go on doing, or just something new that we should take on? That's one of them. And the other is your advisor role at BAME, or what was it? Yeah.
Yes.
What are the issues that you are discussing now, or that you find most interesting? What are your work about in that context?
So my advice for the Folkekirke, I was thinking, actually today I heard something that Denmark has been more generous this time with the Ukraine crisis, with the Ukraine war, than it has ever been. And that there has been more money which has come for this, and more quickly than in any other effort. So in the one sense, I want to say, keep on doing what you're doing. Yeah, that's one thing. But in another sense, what I might like to do is to say, be open a little bit more. I want to say the words that Jesus said, which is ephatha, be open. Be open to difference, be open to newness, be open to doing something a little bit different to the way you did it last year. Because one of the things that I find in Danish society is, it's a very democratic one. It's wonderful because, is it the overstor, the person who chairs the meeting or brings people in? It's so good. I love it. It means that every voice is heard, but then the decisions take a long time to be made. But when they're made, they're kind of fixed in stone. We did this like this, so we'll do it ad infinitum in this way. No, please, Folkekirke and Danish society, please be open to doing it again differently, maybe a little modification. So I'm going to do, I won't say the context, but I'm going this is nearly 4 years of being here. And I'm going to something soon. And we're going to use the same prayers for the 4th year running, because we used it that first year. I'm sure God's ears are tired. I'm sure God might think, oh, wouldn't it be great to hear some different words this year? So that's my thing. So, and the second question in terms of my BAME work is, it has all been about racial justice in the diocese in Europe. So I don't have to tell you, 2020 had two really big focus. One was the pandemic, and thank God that we're coming through that. But the second aspect was a protest, Black Lives Matter, and something which came from wider society informed the church that the church itself wasn't doing enough about racial justice. So saying a terrible thing about the Anglican Church, about the Church of England, over 30 years, there were 160 recommendations made in order to have greater racial justice within the church. This was at the highest level, at synodical level. 0 recommendations were implemented over 30 years, 0. Well, 2020 was the watershed because it made us realize what we were doing for racial justice was just talking, yeah, never implementing. So my work for the diocese has meant that when George Floyd died, I said to the diocese, for 2 months, all we've talked about is pandemic. When are we going to talk about protest? So actually the bishops got the whole of Europe on Zoom, and we met like this to have prayer, to protest what was happening, you know, about the loss of that life. And then in the context of the prayer, we held silence for 8 minutes, 46 seconds, because that was the silence of that man's death. How long? And we wanted to feel that pain. But it wasn't just about a symbolic gesture or prayer. It was to say, what are we going to do as action? And we realized we had no policy in the diocese in Europe about justice, racial justice. So I'm now part of a group. We created a policy. It was adopted by Synod. It's gone to all the chaplaincies in Europe, so nearly 200 chaplaincies. And we're trying to implement some of the things that we committed ourselves to.
Yeah, thank you.
Does that answer it?
Yeah. I think Annie's nodding, right? Yeah. I think it was very concise in both cases, actually. So we have still 4 minutes, and I need to use 1 for my advertisement. So there's still 3 minutes for somebody to say something if anybody wants to comment or ask a question. But we already have got a lot, so maybe we're full in a way. Yeah. Well, maybe I could ask. Oh, okay. Anna? Yeah.
I think you're on mute.
Yeah, you should unmute, yeah. Anna, you have to unmute. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I made some integration courses actually. And what we did was just people that move from Western Jutland to Copenhagen, they have a very different culture. And people that move from Sweden to Denmark, they're also really, it's just the same actually. It's if you meet somebody from a totally another culture. Oh, that's just what I can say.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. There can be meetings at many levels. Do you want to comment on that one, Smitha?
No, I think it's absolutely right. You know, it's, I can tell you a funny story. When when I was newly ordained, I was sent to a part of the country that I didn't know. And the people in that part of the country are very plain speaking. So I went with my husband to look at the church house that I was going to be living in. And as we wandered around the house, the person, the church warden actually, said to me, right, Smitha, if we like you, we'll tell you. If we don't, you can go off down to the mosque. So it was kind of get lost, okay? But the same context, 3 months later, I had moved, I had a young daughter, and we used to see the same woman at the bus stop, and never really spoke to her other than sort of, hello, that's it. And then we didn't see her, or she didn't see my daughter for ages. And then she said something like, "As growd, enta." And I thought, I cannot understand what you're saying. It was supposed to be English, but I could not understand it. So she says, "As growd, enta." I said, "I'm sorry," and I just sort of smiled, and we got on the bus and we went. And then when I went to the church, I said, I met this woman who said this. "As growd, enta." And then she said, "No, what she meant was, she's grown, hasn't she? Your child, your daughter has grown, hasn't she?" And then immediately somebody in the church said, "No, we don't talk to those people. They live in," and it was 2 miles away, because they didn't speak the right dialect. "As growd anta," because in this place you say "as growd era." So it's just the things about Jutland to Copenhagen. It could be 2 miles or it could be 2 blocks.
Yeah. I think we sense that in many parishes living next to each other, actually, with the blocks and the nice villas, right? Yeah, good. Okay, but actually the time is up, so I'll just flag that we have another webinar next week, and that will be about hybrid identities, and that is a lecturer from the Pedagogical University. And actually, I'm not quite sure of her name right now. Maybe Anne can assist me. And while you're unmuting, I'll also say what? Kalaya. Iman Kalaya. And she has published a book, and she's really a capacity in this area. So I'm looking very much forward to that one as well. And then on the 31st of March, and that is physical, because we hope to meet some of you also physically. We have a whole day, or from 10 to 15 in Odense, so where we meet across the country. And I'm happy to say that we are up to 25, 30 participants, so we are running, and it will be really interesting. We have Jakob Erichs from Aarhus University and some Swedish experiences. The Swedish anthropologist working for the Svenska kyrkan, she's called Christina Kjellin, and Nils Hvid and Chin and other capacities will share from their areas and experience, and so it will be really good. So if you're interested, then please contact Anna or me, or look at our website. And then last but not least, a big thank you to Smitha. I think actually you gave us for more than 1 hour. It's really have been very condensed and very good. So there's a lot of stuff to think about and to come back on probably. So a big clap for Smitha.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone for participating. It's been a pleasure.